Welcome to the Celeritas Director Commentary Series, Episode 1.
Hi, this is Alexander Adell, the creator of Celeritas, and this is the beginning of the Director Commentary Series. We're going to go through, have a conversation about each episode and some of the stories behind how they were made and some of the lore behind the characters. If you like Celeritas and you like this kind of storytelling, please follow me on Instagram at an account called ZA_output, where I'm documenting a few times a week the process of writing a brand new screenplay and all of the twists and turns and the challenges of taking story notes and meetings with managers, how to solve story problems and how to think about structure. If that sounds interesting to you, check it out. I'm here with old friend and unofficial editor of Celeritas, Ryan Coleman, who I was on the phone with for half the time I was trying to get this show done. Not many people know more about this show than Ryan. The last name is Coleman, the namesake of the Coleman Pit from...
somewhere deep in Mars.
We were going to go through episode 1 today, talk about some of the backstory and where the show came from. We'll be running this like a casual conversation podcast with occasionally hitting play and listening to the show for a bit and then pausing and kind of talking about different moments. Director commentary style. Oh, big, making my way over to the starboard side now. Let's talk about the music.
Sure.
One of the things, the weirdest thing about this show is how much it came from music and how the music was the inspiration for the show.
So how'd you stumble upon these artists that
I think I was just in a weird spot and I got into ambient music and started discovering a few amazing artists, and the music would kind of drag me into these strange places in my head. And then the most incredible thing is that when I started making the show, I reached out to these artists and told them about the show and asked if I could, it's like, I wrote this show because of your music. Can I use your music in the show?
and at this point you haven't created anything.
Nothing.
You've just written your
Yeah.
script. So they have literally no idea
Yeah.
what this is and
Yeah,
who
and I
you
have...
are.
Yeah, just a fan sending them a email to their, publicly available address. And I think 9 times out of 10 they wrote me back and said yes. For that song right there, that's Alluvium. That's Matthew Cooper. It was an Alluvium song that started this whole thing. Not that song. It was a different one that I ended up using later in the season. But the music, I couldn't write these episodes without the music. And in some episodes, the music was the structure. Some 15-minute dramatic ambient song, like I would sort of see the whole show in those 15 minutes. And
you'd write it and cut it
kind of
to that song.
Kind of, yeah. And these musicians are so incredible that it elevates the show. It makes the show so much better. To have Alluvium and A Winged Victory for the Sullen and Stars of the Lid and Rolly Porter, and whose insane talents I've borrowed to make the show better. And the show is so lucky to have their sound involved, because without it, I don't think the show would be half of what it was. So anyway. Computer, new message for Clementine Keating. Hey, little seahorse. I miss you. How are you? Clem, do you know what I'm doing right now? I'm doing an EVA, an extravehicular activity. A spacewalk. Not really a walk. It's more like a hang-on for dear life. But don't worry, I got the magnet gloves and the tether on and everything. So when I first wrote this episode, and even produced the first version of episode 1, it started out with just things going wrong and alarms going off, and we got some feedback very early on that people were just confused. All I'm hearing is all this techno jargon, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I'm listening to it. It just seems like there's a bunch of chaos. And
confusing chaos, not
just
mysterious chaos.
Yeah. It was
what
just,
is actually happening here?
Yeah, and why do I care?
Yeah, why do I care?
Yeah, and because I really geeked out and wanted to use very correct terminology, like I had schematics of the space shuttle up, and I was, finding cool terms for various parts of the space shuttle and various ports and things that would go wrong. So like all the different parts of the ship that I mentioned when things are starting to explode, those are all like real parts of circ pump.
Now, how long did it take you to research those things to be able to write a couple lines of dialogue? Emergency surge through pump 4, opening CB now. I mean, is this stuff you're just making up?
No.
Is it so you're looking at schematics of
Yeah.
actual spaceships, figuring out how they work, and then okay, if there's an explosion or if I'm having a leak?
A little bit, like enough. No one can build a real ship based on what I'm saying, but research gives you, it's a gift, right? The words I would make up wouldn't sound half as cool as the real ones. It feels like cheating to be able to go look at a space shuttle schematic and see the cool words that they use for the various parts and the circulation pump and and I would listen to old communication between, because lots of NASA communication, radio communication, even just normal chatter between space shuttle in Houston or whatever, a lot of that stuff is online. So I would just listen to hours of just ground control, talking to pilots and talking to captains. And I found a few recordings of when things started going wrong. Nothing catastrophic, but like things started going wrong, you sort of hear the tension build and there's problems and things aren't being solved and how they communicate, do this. And it's so cool how NASA is going through tons of schematics and then in the way they sort of list off what the astronaut is supposed to do in order to solve these problems, because they can't do it remotely from Houston. So they're like giving them these instructions. They're trying to do it fast, but they're trying to be calm. This whole scene where he's like climbing around on the outside and like having the conversation with his daughter was actually not originally part of the script. It was introduced to sort of be like, let's sort of ease our way in here. And
We subtly set up the entire story because the first person Owen's talking to is his daughter, mentions the seahorse. You're putting it all there. This earliest versions of your recording, is this in your home? Where are you recording? Is this in your car?
It's car, yeah.
This is in your car.
Yeah.
Doing this, and that's what creates the slight echo effect.
No, that's all post effect.
Sound dampening.
The kind of radio sound, the kind of crackly sound, taking some of the bass out, adding a little bit of distortion, having a little bit of gating so it kind of clips a little bit at the beginning, a little bit at the end. That's all in post. But what I figured out was that the best recording environment I had available to me, where it could be completely dampened sound, a dead room, was my car. It was the middle of COVID, and so I would sneak off to my car with like a backpack full of recording equipment. And then I realized that when there became more screaming, I was like, I don't even think this is appropriate.
When the screaming arrived,
yeah,
you couldn't sit in your driveway,
yeah,
because the neighbors might think, oh, Xander, it's finally happened. Here he goes.
And if I did it in the garage, what if my kids like heard me screaming, So the first time I tried, I was like, I'll just drive somewhere else. So I like drove to I just like pulled over to the side of a small road and tried doing some recording there, and I listened to it, and you hear cars driving by. I was like, this isn't even gonna work. So I found a state park that was like 20 minutes away, and I would go park in the parking lot of the state park in the middle of the summer, and it was baking hot, and I'm in my car sweating like
with
crazy.
the engine off. You can't
engine
run
off.
anything. Yeah, you're just
air conditioning off,
sweltering, severe heat and humidity,
and kind of suffering, and it worked, and it was quiet, and so that became my routine of driving to the state park and screaming in my car.
Now, what about the other actors? Would you put them in your car and drive them to a spot too, or did you figure out a place to?
Well, first of all, other actors did not come in to play for.
Well, you do have some. You have Mission Control. You've got Abby.
Yeah.
You got a couple things.
Kurt Stamberger, Erica Alperin. You hear his voice in a second, and then Erica plays the voice of Abby. I would tell them, try your car. The microphone doesn't matter nearly as much as the room you're in.
So you would give them the lines and have them record their lines on their own?
It was always remote. At the beginning, I would just send them the lines, and then they would send me a recording, and I would send them notes, and I started to realize that's not a good, it's just not efficient. And so then we started doing, down the road, I started doing Zoom sessions, and they'd have a recording set up on their end, but I could still direct them via Zoom, and I could hear the performance on Zoom. And then
they'd be in their car.
They'd be in their car, they'd be under a pile of blankets, or they'd be...
Do you have any of those Zoom recording clips of your actors hiding under a ton of blankets?
Yeah, I do. Oh, they activating the S-18. I'm sorry I didn't send a message yesterday, Clem. They got me really busy up here. Better than before. Shit! Hope, Vega, panel R68 is compromised.
So these alarms...
Looks like it's leaking oxygen. I'm heading back...
Did you create all these sounds? Did you find sounds and manipulate them, or how did that process go? Because you have quite a few different alarms throughout the series, but this is the OG alarm right here in episode 1.
Yeah.
So is this a created sound by you?
My sound effects game got more sophisticated as the season went on, but at the beginning, I would find sounds that didn't require any,
licensing.
And so it was a process of finding an alarm that I liked, and then bringing it in, and then kind of cleaning it up, and then looping it nicely.
And you're putting it into which program?
Into Ableton.
And then you're manipulating the sounds in there?
Yeah, manipulating the hell out of it. It was just this constant process of go look for a few alarms, chop them up, this will be the alarm for this. And the amount of thought I put into which alarm did what, and making sure that this type of alarm was never used for this type of situation, no one cares.
I could not believe that you made all this on your own. It sounded as if you were working in $1 million studio. But you had to learn so many new things. So just in this first episode, you're teaching yourself how to record dialogue, bring in sound effects, manipulate them. And this first episode probably took you countless hours just trying to figure out how to even do it.
I was just doing the season Bible and writing from like April to June, and then from June to October, I made episode 1 and 2, 5 times. I did it once, would share it with a few people, they would have some notes, and then I'd do it all over again. All the lines would change. The first version of it, I did relatively quickly. And that's one of the incredible things about a fiction podcast is you can make your first version in a really short period of time, especially if you keep your scope relatively small.
And what's a short period of time?
I think I probably only spent a few weeks making the first rev of episode 1.
And then 4 months reworking it.
Yeah, and I brought it to 2 friends of mine. We had like a dude's vacation as a baby shower, and I brought this, and one night I was like, guys, do you want to hear something? I hadn't really told them anything about it.
Did they have any idea?
Not really.
You were about to say this?
No, not really. And so I hit play, and we had, I brought some big speakers because we were playing music and stuff. And
the reaction?
And they really liked it. And it was, it's that you need those little wins. It wasn't perfect by any means. It needed to be redone a bunch of times.
But the potential was there.
They got it, and they were like, keep going. You need those little tiny pushes in the beginning.
Yeah, that positive
otherwise you're like,
cheerleading.
Am I crazy? Yeah.
For people who don't know, when you mention Season Bible, just explain what that is real quick in terms of what is that breakdown?
Yeah, it's the Hollywood term is a Bible. It's an outline. It's a season outline. That was one of the things I was really excited about with this project is I love TV, and one of the things that I'm always so impressed with is when you watch a season and something happens in the finale that was planted in the first episode.
The payoff. The long payoff.
It feels like magic. If you know a pretty good idea of the entire arc of your story, you have a pretty good idea of how it's going to end right from the beginning, if you do all of the work to build an entire season, not write an entire season. My original outline, the final episode had like 3 or 4 bullet points. It's not like I put...
Broad strokes of where you think it's going to go.
Yeah.
Fully knowing that when you get to a certain point, things could completely change.
By working through each episodic arc of what happens with these characters, and then working through the entire season arc, you put yourself in this very strong position in episode 1 where you can see the end game and sneak it into every line of every episode, so that when people get to the end, it's all there, and it's always been there from the beginning. And I didn't always get it right. Like, my nickname for my daughter when she was little is I called her Doodlebug. So in the original cut of this episode that was published, when Owen is talking on the radio and leaving a message for his daughter, he's like, "Hey, Doodlebug, da 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 da." And it wasn't until episode 6 that I was like, her nickname should be Seahorse. This is the story of the seahorse.
And this might be news in a sense to podcast listeners like myself. When I found out, you told me, oh yeah, I can actually go back into episode 1 and make any changes I need to and then republish. And
I tried to not do it.
But I mean, for important things. It wasn't like you went in and just redid it. It was, holy shit.
The payoff will be so much stronger if I make these minor adjustments. One of them was your idea. So the term is retconning, retroactive continuity. And every time I did, I wrote a post about it. I was very clear about it with the people
your
who
community.
Yeah, because I didn't want them to feel like they missed out on some payoff or whatever. And so, and everyone always seemed fine with it. But I only did a little bit of retconning. But one of them was that her nickname was Seahorse. Considering so much of the story is this sort of seahorse imagery, it only
just
made
perfect
sense.
sense.
Having a season Bible right from the beginning. That's how you have those magical moments for a listener when they get to the end and they're like, oh my gosh, they've been building this since, that's my job. My job is to always know. To know right from the beginning where we're headed so that I can guide the listener into the biggest emotional pop possible at the end that's been building since the second the show starts.
It took you 4 months to put together episode 1 and 2, which together is 22 minutes of content. As you went down further in the series, where your episodes started becoming 30, 40, 45 minutes. It was still taking you 3 to 4 months, but it was a much bigger scale at that point.
And I started building in more time towards the end. I realized I needed more time for feedback, for revision. For the first few episodes, I would finish it at 3 a.m, hit publish, and the next day find out that maybe I should have done something slightly different. Later on, I started building in a lot more time for feedback, sharing it on Discord, sharing early episodes and getting feedback from fans about what was confusing before hitting publish, which was really cool. That really helped a lot when 3 people write back and say, I really could not tell that he went from this room to that room. That's a solvable problem that I need to solve. And
which was part of your move of talking to Vega, talking to your computer. You could tell us what was happening as it was happening in a genuine, authentic way that didn't feel forced, exposition on this.
And I didn't like that game, You
hated it, but I kept telling you, you have to do this. And when we get to the moon, we'll talk about it really when we get to the moon. Because that to me was the first time where you had so much action going on, and it was so difficult to understand what was happening, unless you were telling us what was happening as it happened.
I really believed that the sound effects would tell everybody, but it just never worked. As hard as I worked to make the sounds as cinematic and descriptive as possible. Okay.
To lock it down.
Message received.
Seeing Hope Mission Control. We're monitoring Delta P and seeing rise in...
That's Kurt Stamberger in the background.
Fantastic voice, by the way. Literally sounds just... Imagine what Houston would sound like.
Kurt studied astronautics at Stanford.
Okay, pneumatic methane ISO is
like,
now
so
open.
he knows what he's saying when he's saying
fill and drain for 8 seconds.
Warning, LH 3 FPS chamber pressure 23% over base.
Pan. This Vega 5C, LOX 3 has ruptured, and we have a fire in the aux pre-burner.
It was fun learning about phrases like pan.
Yeah.
I'd never... You start reading about what does the pilot say when your plane's going down?
I'm going to try an emergency cabin decompression.
And Kurt was a big help with that. I'd write a script and he'd read it. He'd be like, they don't say that.
Used to pressure dump and repressurize the cabin. Oh, Vega, the fire has been extinguished. Light support is nominal. All integrity is nominal. Assessing engine damage.
Here comes that French horn.
Anyway, I love you, Clem. I'll talk to you soon. Computer end message and send.
Magnesium Film presents Celeritas.
That's Erica, also the voice of Abby Malton.
For bonus content,
and I always wondered, is that going to be weird for people to have one person being both the...
Well, she's pretty calm during the announcements,
Yeah,
versus Abby's got a little bit more edge going on.
Reminder, scheduled publicity event. Earth Kids Q&A with Captain Owen Keating. Starting
come on.
in
So
2 minutes.
when did the idea of this
Requesting to
smart
postpone
way
the
of doing
publicity.
exposition occur? Where you realize, oh, I can do a Q&A, and then I can actually talk more about what this mission is in a
Cabin pressure
somewhat vague way, but
nominal.
help the listener understand.
Owen, Abby here on a private channel.
Pretty early on.
You're all right.
I think that was part of the...
What you just went through.
Something bad needed to happen where you kind of get excited. You hear what the protagonist is sort of capable of in a dynamic situation. And now you've got people like, oh, okay, this is going to be fun. Then I wanted to establish this is a normal astronaut on a cool mission, interacting with mission control, interacting with people. People are aware of him. I really wanted it to feel like a modern day relationship with an astronaut. This guy's in space. It's a little bit lonely. There are press events. I really wanted the beginning to have him feel pretty connected to his world. And so the Q&A, I knew that I needed some exposition. And exposition is the hardest part with sci-fi because done wrong, it's just so boring. It takes you out of it. I do think that this Q&A, I didn't nail it. It's kind of on the wrong side of exposition-y, but I wanted to establish that he knew his stuff. This is someone who's kind of an analytical enough mind that all of the problems that come up over the rest of the season, you're like, well, he seems like a pretty bright dude who can probably think his way through a lot of situations. And then I wanted to set up what the mission was and why they were there.
And you also dropped in his annoyance with some of the very aspects of the ship that he then relies on later. He doesn't understand why they're there, which is a great way to do it as well.
Yeah.
Because an annoyed person, you're just like, yeah, stupid double hull.
Yeah.
Why does he need a solar system? But
That
not
was-
realizing, where that end game was headed.
I'm glad you brought that up. I do that a lot. It's a lesson from Star Wars that I have appreciated for a really long time. There's a scene I always think about where they're in the Millennium Falcon and they're about to jump, and Han Solo says something to the effect of, he kind of explains how hyperdrives work, but he does it yelling in kind of a funny way. And he says something like, you have to do X, Y, and Z, or this is going to be a real short trip. It tells you so much about the technology. But he does it yelling. He does it as a joke. There's alarms going off. And so you get this exposition of how the hyperdrive works without someone saying, well, here's how the hyperdrive works, or how do hyperdrives work again?
Yeah, without having to listen to C-3PO try to explain it.
Yeah,
one more
exactly.
time.
I started to just think of myself as like an exposition mule. Like my job with a show that has this much science in it and has a plot and a universe that's so complex, I need to get a lot of exposition out. And I have to sneak it out as often as I can. And I really don't want to have people rehashing things and explaining things. How can I have people yelling exposition, basically? And so this conversation is more sort of just explainy. But for the rest of the season, I continued to hone the art of screaming exposition.
It's a 10 miracle mission. So, that's one down.
Was there ever any conscious thought about the 10 miracle mission? Were you counting down? Back when
No.
you're 9, and I know at one point I sort of went through.
I think you
Nine,
told me. I
around
think
there.
you were like, I
And
think he's
said,
out of
"You're-
miracles.
Yeah, you're almost out of miracles. Is this something that we're gonna pay off later? And you say, no, I think you're looking a little too more into this.
I think I honored your question, ultimately. I think it's episode 9, when he's in the ship and there's no air. He's running out of oxygen, he's freezing to death. He says something like, yeah, I think that was all the miracles.
Yeah,
But and I wouldn't have thought of that line if you hadn't have pointed out, like, how many miracles does he have left? I was like, I'm not clocking that.
dude, I'm trying to write this thing. Edit
No, but that was a great note. I did sneak that in there.
All the great things Solaritus is doing.
Media broadcast recording in 3, 2, 1, live.
Hi. This thing says that there's 35 million people watching this. It's a lot for the Space Channel. Planets, gravity, time. Called general relativity. Which means that everything we think we know about how
I feel like a lot of people are like, no, I'm not into
just
this show.
experiments like
We're getting like a science lesson from a sci-fi podcast.
for everything. Digitize human minds.
All
and
right.
for
When Owen says digitizing human minds, does he have any concept of ultimately where this company is going?
You do find out later that he knows, like later on when he's like, is this a sim? am I hooked up to one of your mind lab wonks? Abby was sort of a billionaire entrepreneur doing a bunch of projects, and maybe one of her projects was trying to digitize human minds. In its early stages at his company, but that wasn't going to really go anywhere unless they made some serious leaps in science.
There's that later episode when he's sending the rest and relaxation, friends and fucking family message to Sean and says, hey, I did know some stuff. So I just wondered, was that him admitting I actually knew? Or, you know, and we'll get to that. What did he actually know?
Sure.
I'm very curious to know what he actually did know when we get to that.
Limit damage. Cure all diseases. We begot. Okay, last one. This one's from Sarah G. in Indiana. Sarah asks, is it scary all alone without your family?
Downlink interrupted.
In the original script, in the original version of the episode, recorded episode, he completely breaks down and cries. He's like a blubbering mess.
And you didn't quite want to show the mental breakdown that was coming that early?
It was friends that were like,
he needs to have it better together.
An astronaut has their shit better together than this. I wanted to imply the magnitude of what I wanted later on for you to realize, oh, that's why he was so screwed up about this. He knows that he is embarking on something people don't realize how much of a commitment he's about to make. And that's why he was so screwed up. But
now, his original commitment is 2 years, right?
You later on find out that he knows it's going to be more like 4 years.
So the longest he truly thinks it will be is 4 years. So his 3-year-old's going to return a 7-year-old and somehow is willing to miss some of the most important years.
Yeah. I wanted to bake that into this moment where he pauses the recording and has a little private moment, and everyone was like, dial it back. And so that's why he just kind of takes a deep breath and then goes on.
If you only knew what I was really about to do.
Downlink resumed.
Yeah. It's scary. But you know what? Sometimes fear is just your body's way of telling you to pay lots of attention. Because you're about to do something new. Diagnostics are back. It looks like losing Locks 3 was a mixed blessing.
I was like, wait, I blew a bunch of shit up in the first 10 seconds and he's still gonna do this engine test? How do I make that sound like a good thing?
Well, I also felt this is a corporation and they take a lot more risks
confirmation.
versus NASA.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
And the fact that he's by himself in the spaceship, which hasn't happened since Mercury.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I also felt, at first I thought, oh, that's not realistic. And I thought, well, corporate America might be like, screw that. We can do one-person trips again.
For engine test 2B. I know.
So this is like my whole family.
G and C. E-com.
That was my dad, that was Marshall, that was my sister.
For engine test 2B.
Here we go. Oh, Vega. I'm commencing engine test 2B.
The seatbelts, the amount of work in the edit to get those seatbelts right.
To sound correct.
Adjusting
What
I had
trajectory update?
seatbelt on,
Computer
and
override
then I had
bearing
seatbelt
change.
off.
Oh, Vega, I've received an
Because in
unscheduled
seatbelt
trajectory
off, you want the
update
click
requesting
and then
abort.
the zipping sound.
Yeah.
Firing 3 Gs.
Abby, what have you done?
Oh my god. There it is. It's like a ripple.
Message received.
So that is 3-year-old Penelope, my daughter.
Okay, so let's talk about that right there. This sound effect, this entire little sequence here, is the moment, for me at least, when I thought, holy shit, okay, anything is sort of possible in this story. Because whatever that just was wild. And it gave that idea of it's going to be worth your while to keep going. Because I'm giving you a little taste of what your ears are going to hear and enjoy even more and more with all kinds of different... Yeah. It's like opening up the world. It's like the door opened of, we're going into a very strange, potentially evil, dark place. So how did you do all that? How long did that take? When did you realize, okay, I can just start manipulating my actors' voices, my own voices?
A lot of that's in the script. And I've been producing music for half my life. And I love messing with sound effects. I love twisting
And you've been doing that for a long time.
Forever. Yeah. That's my favorite thing, is sitting there with weird knobs. I mean, it's when I was a kid, on my very first computer, I had this little sound effect program at 12, and I figured out how they did a sound effect in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. When Bill and Ted are in hell, I was blown away as a kid watching it because you hear their echo before they talk. They're like, hey Bill, what's going on? There's this strange like pre-echo, and I was like, oh. First you reverse the audio, then you put an echo effect on the reversed audio, and then you take the entire reversed audio with the forward reverb, and then you reverse that whole thing again. So now the reverb runs up to their words, and their words are now forwards again.
Wow.
And so I've always just had machines around with knobs that make
So this particular part you have had...
This was like... I couldn't wait.
You couldn't, this was bread and butter for you.
I couldn't wait to do this effect. I was so excited. I kind of knew how I was going to attack it. One of the main tools I use throughout the whole show is a concept called granular synthesis. The basic idea of granular synthesis is you take a sample, someone saying hello, and instead of playing through it, you drop the little playhead in lots of little spots for milliseconds. So it sounds like what's actually being played is popping all around along the sample. Normally a playhead will go across the sample just hello, but once you start messing with granular synthesis, it starts to get messy, because it's not playing smoothly, it's now chopping its way through as it plays. And the more you start to turn those knobs, things start to break apart and get really strange and sometimes really beautiful. And so I use granular synthesis for almost every major effect in the show. When he says abort and you start hearing his voice start chopping up, it's this granular synthesis. It's kind of popping all around. When she kind of does that bye daddy thing again at the end, you could still hear the phrase, but it was now like ripped apart. The thing I was constantly trying to do in the show is I'd have this image in my head and I'd have this science in my head about how a thing was going to work. And the idea of how he ends up achieving light speed or getting so close to it. No one was supposed to know about this black hole except him and Abby and maybe a few people on the team. He was going to come in and get really close to it and use the black hole to do a slingshot effect to speed him up a lot. And so that final adjustment is she basically sends him in almost right into the middle of it. And so that's what I was really trying to do with the sound is you kind of hear it go like the idea being that he's like kind of spinning around this thing basically.
Like he's circling the drain of the black hole?
If you listen to that effect with headphones, you are hearing it go left, right, left, right, left, right, faster and faster and faster. And so you get this oscillating, spinning effect. And in my mind, I'm like, everyone's going to be able to tell that he's spinning around a black hole. I'm like, what I need was, that was a cool sound.
Myself included was, what the hell just happened? That was awesome.
Exactly.
I don't know what happened. Now I know he's somewhere else.
That was my constant experience with the show is I had this very clear image in my head and I thought that I had used all the right sounds and effects to describe exactly what that thing is. And people are driving to work and someone's honking at them. And they have the podcast on. Yeah.
You're watching dishes and your kids are yelling at you.
People are not paying nearly as much attention to every single layer of my sound effect as I thought they were. I got better at understanding my intention versus what's going to be understood and how to balance that. I had to learn that lesson over and over and over again. It was always important to me to write these scripts as something on screen, as something you would see. if I could see the world and I could describe the world that I saw, then it made it a lot easier for me to do sound effects for it, because I knew what it looked like. So I could put together an audioscape that matched what I saw. But the problem is that after working with it so visually as a writer, it was very hard for me to stay in touch with the perspective of the audience that had no fucking idea what I was talking about and had never seen it visually and did not see the things that I saw.
And aside from a few people on Discord had not read it.
Yeah.
Because you are very descriptive. I mean, just Owen going out to fix the solar sail is very visual prose. But my note literally was, how are you translating this into a podcast? ?
That was my relationship with the show to the very last episode. I would write it, and then you and other folks would be like, how is anyone going to know that this is what's going on? I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right. He's going to have to say something. But I never...
And then you'd complain to be like, I don't want Owen to just sit here
talking about what fucking room he's in.
Yeah.
I hate that stuff. It was so painful to write, like, I am now doing this type exposition.
That's this medium.
That's the medium. Yeah. You can't get away from it. I think I was somewhat in denial the entire project that this was purely an audio project. Every episode I wrote, there was always a few moments where people would be like, what is he doing here? And I'd be like, crap. And I'd go in and I'd have to write some dialogue. And I'd always try to write dialogue that was not too exposition-y.
So on this, you wrote these 2 episodes first, 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then you started actually building it as 1 and 2. How long was that process when you first germinated the idea?
I really committed to figuring out this world in like April of 2021.
It was released when, in November, you said?
I think October.
October, yeah, that makes
October
sense.
of 2021
Yeah.
is when the first episode was released.
You had written a Bible before you had started these 2 episodes.
Yeah.
While you were making them, did you feel fully confident that you were going to keep going? Or was there a moment of, okay, I'm just going to get 1 and 2 done and see what kind of feedback I get or see how I feel?
I was pretty sure I was going to do the whole thing because I deluded myself into thinking that it was so hard making 1 and 2 and I learned so much. I'd gotten down the learning curve enough that I was like, okay, well, it'll probably start going a lot faster after this. This process will speed up. This will probably be a year-long project. And so I'll take a year, I'll do this, and I'll be glad I did it. Because, I didn't expect all that much. The podcast that I fell in love with that inspired me to do this show, they weren't being made into TV shows or anything. They were just great. And I wanted to be part of that world, part of that community. It seemed like an amazing art form that really spoke to me. I was pretty committed to finishing the whole thing, yeah. I always wanted to tell a story where the end was astronomically so far away from the beginning that the viewer could never have possibly predicted where this was going, but still feels organic. And I really wanted to tell that whole story. And that was one of I'd written screenplays and I'd written pilots and stuff, and I wanted the experience of writing an entire season, even just for me, even just to know I could do it. Mm-hmm. And here was a process where I could not only write a season, but actually produce it and get feedback on it. And the decision to release episodes as I made them was recommended against by most people. Everyone's like, that's not how you do it. You do the entire season, then you release them once a week. Well, let's talk about that more for episode 2. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Alexander Adell, creator of Solaritus. I'm building my next project in public, and I'd love to have you along for the train wreck of the creative process. Just follow ZA_output on Instagram. It's going to be a mess. Drop by and say hi. I hope to see you there. All right, now back to the show.